own 21st century naturalist journeys. We're also hoping, as Anne said, that the panel will be really vibrant and a shared learning experience. We know we have a lot of people on here, over 100 people are on already. So please don't hesitate to add your thoughts and reactions in the chat as the presentations are underway. You'll notice that you have an option of either chatting to everyone or just the hosts and panelists. We encourage you to use everyone so we can all see where you're from, what you're doing, and what your interests are. As you have questions during the panel presentations, please add those questions to the chat as they come to you. And then we'll take time at the end, probably the last half an hour. We'll have plenty of time for questions and discussions after we've heard from each of the panelists. So I am really excited to introduce our very first panelist today, who is Nicole Jackson. Nicole is an environmental educator who has made it her mission to bridge the gap between nature and mental health. She demonstrates a profound commitment to environmental justice and the well-being of historically marginalized communities. With a strong background in environmental education and a deep appreciation for the natural world, she has forged a unique path as an advocate for mental health, equity, and better representation of Black voices in the outdoors. She earned her Bachelor's of Science degree right here in Natural Resources from Ohio State University, and has since developed heart-centered programs and worked directly with individuals to help them find solace, joy, and liberation through nature connection. As an advocate for green spaces in cities, she is committed to ensuring that Black communities have access to nature, environmental knowledge, and an understanding of the power of story in outdoor spaces. And as a tireless advocate for environmental equity, Nicole is committed to dismantling barriers and working towards a sustainable, just future. She continually engages in educational research, community building, and environmental activism to promote her vision of a world where excluded and marginalized communities can reconnect with themselves through meaningful nature experiences. A few years ago, Nicole started her own nature coaching business, In Her Nature LLC, focused on nature therapy for women. And she's also a freelance environmental education consultant, leveraging her love for the outdoors to empower individuals to connect with nature, embrace its healing powers, and foster a deeper understanding of self and the natural world. Her coaching expertise encourages those seeking more joy and healing practices to experience the transformative benefits of spending time in nature, further amplifying the call for environmental justice. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Marika. I'm so glad to be here. Welcome, everyone. I'm seeing the names all popping up in the chat. So good to see where everybody's viewing from. And today is one of those days where I've been on my computer most of the day. So I'm actually at the Grange Insurance Audubon Center here in Columbus, Ohio. And I have this beautiful view of the outside, at least for myself to be able to look at as I'm a part of this panel and sharing my story. So I'm glad for that. And I'm hoping I can get a little bit of a walk in after this before the sun goes down. So my name is Nicole Jackson. I am an environmental educator, birder, and nature advocate. And I'm actually from Cleveland, Ohio. And I've lived in Columbus for about 15, 16 years now. And I moved here essentially with the thought of going into veterinary medicine. And it wasn't until I actually realized it was way too competitive, something that I wasn't really interested in as far as career field opportunity is, I guess, the competition of gaining a degree. I really wanted to be in discovery exploration mode with my learning. So once I realized that I didn't want to do that anymore, I explored other options and found out about the School of Environment and Natural Resources at The Ohio State University. And with that, at the time, my advisor, Amanda Rodewald, talked to me about a internship monitoring birds, urban birds in Columbus with her grad students. So it was just something for me to delve more into as far as exploring other options for careers. And I did that for three and a half months, studying Acadian flycatchers and cardinals, northern cardinals. And it was a really awesome experience. I'd never done field work before, but I got to be in parks most of the time, and I got to experience birds in a different way, watching them find mates, watching them be banded, but also the environment that they were in. And that's kind of something that really helped me better formulate my career path and thinking about urban environments, green spaces, for people that look like me and how they were utilizing those spaces, not only for education, but also their mental health. So, and that's something I was very much using for myself, and thinking about where I came from, where I grew up in inner city Cleveland. There's just a lot of concrete, not a lot of green space. You know, we did have city parks and things that we would go to, but outside of that, it wasn't too like accessible to get to the really nice, lush green parks. And that's something that definitely piqued my interest of why that was, but also just finding out what other places were out there for me outside of being a college student. So not only did I have an opportunity to learn about those, the birds in the city specifically, but also the parks that I could visit after the internship was done. And it was something so amazing that I could just take my academic quote unquote hat off, but also go into relax and just enjoy the space for what it was. And that was, you know, the city parks, the metro parks, and maybe even some of the state parks that I got to explore and really just be present with. So for me, my nature connection, my nature relationship actually started from trauma. I was in foster care at a very young age with one of my older siblings, and unfortunately, we were abused in foster care. And for me, nature was my solace, my go-to to escape that trauma. So I've held on to that as a therapy tool since, you know, I can think of. I was probably 6, maybe 5 or 6 when I experienced that. So I've been using that as a tool. Initially, it started out as therapy, and then it grew into educational like connection of like actually wanting to learn more about the plants and the animals, ecosystems and habitats. And I had this continued thirst for knowledge and wanting to really find out about the places where I grew up, but also the places where I wanted to go. And I've always had this fascination with faraway places and the wildlife, as well as the habitats that connect all of those things. So for me, it was definitely being able to watch a lot of shows on PBS. I remember from being from Cleveland, there's WBIZ, and reading a lot of books about nature and gardening and how to, you know, become a wildlife vet, or how to become a TV host to talk about nature and wildlife. And I was just so fascinated by those things. And I still pretty much do that now. And I feel like it's definitely expanded into more of a mentorship role and being able to teach others of all ages, but specifically my focus now in doing environmental education has been working more with adults to help them rediscover that joy that they might have had from when they were a kid, to be able to bring that into their everyday, but also pass it on to a young person and help motivate a young person to see the importance and the benefits to mental health with connecting to nature. And it doesn't have to stop when you become an adult. You can still have that sense of wonder well into your senior years, but really understanding the importance of how that impacts our lives. Those relationships with nature really impact our lives in different ways. And it's kind of like a spectrum of learning, but it's so beneficial because it helps with relationship building. And I learned so much about self-worth and about patience and compassion through my own relationship with nature. And that's something I definitely want to spread more of through the work that I do. Some of the over the past decade, I actually graduated on a quarter system from the Ohio State University. So we are on 10 weeks instead of, I think, 12 now, as far as it being semesters. But I graduated right before they switched to semesters. And I felt like it was an opportunity for me to really think about how I wanted to utilize environmental education in different ways. So locally, regionally, as well as nationally. So actually, a lot of my work that I've been doing over the past decades started out nationally, and that was actually through the Children in Nature Network. I was part of their Natural Leaders Network I joined the cohort back in 2013. I've also been a part of the National Parks Conservation Association, which focuses on national park advocacy for young people, young professionals who advocate for national parks, and also connecting children, youth to opportunities around careers, but also bird watching is a big part of that. So I started bird watching in 2009, which was around the time the internship took place. And I've been using it ever since in my program. And it really gives me an opportunity to connect with myself and slow down, but also show other people the beautiful uniqueness of their neighborhoods, their backyards, when we see a variety of birds. So I'm so excited to share a little bit more, hopefully with questions from the audience, and have an opportunity to learn more about the other panelists. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for as a city girl myself. I grew up in New York City, and I really appreciate what you said about thinking about the places you grew up and the places that you want to go. And I look forward to learning more about your connections between mental health and the health of this world that we live in. Please ask your questions in the chat for Nicole, and we are gonna, as you enter those, we're gonna turn to our next speaker. Next, we're gonna hear from Nancy Stranahan. Nancy is the director of the Arc of Appalachia Preserve System. She was one of the nonprofit's founders back in 1995. And since that time, Nancy has, along with others, cultivated a vigorous citizen advocacy network. And I love this phrasing. It's tree roots as well as grassroots. Thank you. I'm a tree girl. And this network has succeeded in founding 28 preserve regions across Appalachian Ohio, stretching from Holmes County to the Ohio River. The Arc of Appalachia stewards 11,000 acres of natural areas, 70 miles of hiking trails, the Appalachian Forest Museum, and 8 overnight lodges. A few of the signature wildlife species protected inside the Arc include Henslow's sparrows, cerulean warblers, golden star lilies, native bats, synchronous fireflies, spadefoot toads, and timber rattlesnakes. The Arc has also been instrumental in saving Native American Indian ancient earthwork monuments, including Spruce Hill, Glenford, Fort, Steelworks, Junction Earthworks, and most recently, Tremper Mound. The Arc's headquarters is located at the 3,000-acre Highlands Nature Sanctuary, the Arc's largest preserve region. And earlier in her career, Nancy served as chief naturalist for Ohio State Parks and later operated Benevolence Cafe and Bakery in downtown Columbus's City Market, promoting healthy and intentional food choices. Nancy loves teaching, learning, and networking, and saving land. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. I won't spend too much time talking about what I do because I think it's already been well described, but I was one of the founders of the Arc of Appalachia Preserve System, and that was actually 29 years ago. Yeah, I'm 72, you can tell. It's been quite a personal journey and a journey in nonprofit evolution. It's been a really exciting boat to paddle down the river. And one thing we learned as we went along is that it's one thing to save lands, quote unquote, save land, protect land, buy land. And it's another thing to steward it. And in reality, you save land over and over again. Almost every year, something comes up that you have to save, even though you already have your name on the deed. So we've learned over the years that to say that we are a nature preservation system is probably not quite clarifying to people. I've noticed with myself and with others that the word nature is kind of a fuzzy concept, like what is nature? And so we've started to say that what we are really about is buying and saving intact, natural, and ancient communities. And I think it is a little closer to our heart when we say natural communities as opposed to just saying nature. Is nature a rock? Is it a pretty blue sky? It's kind of a fuzzy concept. But when you say that you're actually saving an intact natural community that here in Ohio is probably 60 million years old and is older than the Appalachian Mountains, that's I think kind of hits a little closer to home on the importance of what we're doing. And if we lose that community, we've lost something so ancient that has survived through so many cataclysms that it is a tragic thought that it couldn't survive us. And so my coming into this field was always an ethical journey. It was truly because I couldn't bear the thought that future generations of people might live on this earth and not feel the beauty and the balance and the biodiversity of an intact natural community. For me, my entrance into this was many small steps. Almost everybody I talked to, not everyone, but almost everyone, has had some kind of experience as a child where nature became an anchor for them. Nicole mentioned that for herself. It was definitely for me going through my teenage years, a tree on the big tree on the edge of a ravine with my back to it was a place I could always go to, and I could feel at home, no matter how alien I felt the rest of the world. That was really important to me. As I got older, I met a naturalist. I met several naturalists in the field. I didn't know what they were. And one of my absolute pivotal moments was when one of those people pointed across the field and said, "Oh, look at that gray squirrel. It's over there in the tulip poplars and, on the other side of the field." And I went like, "What?" Like, how can anybody recognize a tree from the other side of the field? I thought that was so amazing. Of course, I didn't know any of my trees. I think I knew a dandelion. I had never noticed turkey vultures were in the sky. I didn't know a robin. That was about it. The blue jays and the chickadees at the feeder. That was my extent of my naturalist knowledge. But I was a great lover of wildlife and anything that tadpoles in the pond, anything I came across was just absolutely enchanting to me. And so that kind of started me on the journey. By the time I got out of high school, I was a decent avocational naturalist. I knew my trees and my birds, and I love wildflowers so much, and they still are the canary in the coal mine for me when we're buying property. I always look for those wildflowers. Another calling came to me when I was in my 40s. For the first time, I went to tropical rainforest, happened to be in Costa Rica. And that was probably my very, very pivotal for me because I always loved biodiversity. I always loved nature. But now I was in a very, very high, naturally biodiverse biome. And I was with a lot more diverse mammals than what I was used to in Ohio. And of course, the plant life was incredible. Parrots flying over my head, and I could feel the brush of the vampire wings against my face at night. And I'm like, oh, they like me. It was a wonderful experience, and it made me realize that a cup that I had always carried empty in my life was my love of biodiversity, and in Costa Rica I had it filled. And that was interesting because you might say, well, then why didn't you go down to Costa Rica and get a van and go do what you're going to do down there? But no, I did come home, and now that I knew what I loved the most, I turned back to my home biome, the Eastern Deciduous Forest of the United States in Appalachian, Ohio, and decided that this is the place I wanted to spend the rest of my life, trying to save biodiversity so that other people could feel that same thrill that I felt out in nature and in the woods. And then lastly, the pivotal moment was there was a park for sale that was private. It's called the Seven Caves. It was in Highland County, Ohio. And it was for sale after being open since the 1929, 1930, and being loved as a children's theme park where children and families could explore the caves and the beautiful gorges and the karst landscape of Seven Caves. When I went to visit that, like I said, it was around, I guess it was right after the Costa Rica trip, right? So I felt terrible that this place was coming up for sale because it did have a lot of natural biodiversity and natural beauty. And I figured it would get, and it just about did get broken up into 5 or 10 acre lots and then houses on the edge of the gorge. And it just seemed like it should be public. It should be loved by all. It should be accessible to all. And these stirrings that I had inside me is what eventually propelled me to found the Highlands Nature Sanctuary, and co-found would be the correct word. I didn't do it alone. But how they came about was this: there's always a particular thing in your life, right? It's not vague, it's a thing. And this thing was this event of Seven Caves coming up for sale, and loving it as a child, and knowing it was going to get subdivided, and knowing that all those flowers are going to get trampled and the features carved on, and boundary lines set up against the grottos. It was more than I could bear. So I think you'll find it perhaps humorous and charming that I spent the next 2 years of my life trying to find somebody else to save it. I went to Nature Conservancy, I went to ODNR, and I talked to as many people as I could. And big surprise, there's so many places to save in Ohio, right? Nobody took the bait on that. And 2 years later, I had this moment, which is the last of the pivotal moments that I'm sharing with you, where it didn't really happen, but my mind remembers it this way. So I think that's profound. And my mind remembers that I was staring in a mirror, and I said, "Who's going to save the caves?" There was no answer, just my reflection in the mirror. And I remember at that time thinking, well, I could try. I mean, like, what does it harm to try? What would happen if I fail? What if I don't try? Then I definitely fail. And so that simple question to myself, or statement, I could try, is really what founded the Arc of Appalachia Preserve System. And it's interesting, we did buy the caves, first bought about 47 acres. That was our first purchase. And we thought that was the end. And as you know, today we are 28 preserves. That little Highlands Nature Sanctuary, beginning of 47 acres, has now been expanded on 72 times. It's now 3,000 acres in size. It's incredible. I wanted to share with you, in terms of what I think is important for the future, is that each one of us, as we mature, no matter what age we are, we're continuing to mature as a soul. And the question, I think, or the statement that we all have to keep asking ourselves every year is, what do we care about the most? What can't we bear to live without? And what would happen if we just tried? The end.
Thank you, Nancy. I was trying to write down what you said at the very end. You said, what do we care about the most? Can you repeat it for me? Because that was really lovely.
Get unmuted here. Oh, gee, things that come out of my mouth, I never remember. I think I said, if I would encourage everyone as they mature in their life, because just because we're 18 or 24 or 28 does not mean we've matured. It means we're on the path.
Mhm.
And so each passing decade of our lives is a possibility of self-empowerment.
Mhm.
And so each decade, when we ask ourselves, what do we care about the most? And what are the things in our life that we can't bear to think would not be in our world or in the world of others? What if we just said, I can try? Whether it's saving nature or it's a piece of legislation or, it's running for office. We all are called. We all have a calling to do something. And the only thing that stops us is we don't think we can.
Thank you. And thank you, Stefan, who got some of that in the chat too. That was really beautiful. Thank you, Nancy. Wow, they're already so good. And I already have so many questions. So if you all have questions, please put them in the chat and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. So next we are going to hear from Rick Gardner. So Rick is currently the chief botanist for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. Rick has been studying Ohio's flora for 30 years. He spent most of his career with the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves and a few years with the Nature Conservancy, Ohio. He's a visiting scholar at the Ohio State University Herbarium, conducting research on Ohio's flora, including non-native invasive species and the sedge family. Go K-Rex. Sorry, that was a dorky botany joke. In addition to his botanical pursuits, he also has been very active in land protection and management. So welcome, Rick.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a panelist. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for joining us out there in the audience, virtual audience. It's hard to follow Nancy. I'm not as eloquent speaker as she is and bring out thoughts as well as she does, but just a little about myself. I currently work for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and I'll talk a little bit about what I do and all of that. Some background about myself. I'm born and raised Ohioan. I grew up in Hamilton, Ohio. I fit the bill of Hamiltuckian. If you folks from Southwest Ohio probably know that term, but I always had an interest in nature at a very young age. I have photographs taken of me studying the flowers of tulips and daffodils in our yard in urban Ohio. And as I grew up, I was very fortunate. I had the opportunity, which a lot of people don't have. My grandparents, my grandfather grew up on a farm, and his dream was to move back to a farm. So he bought his wife's cousin's property, which they use as a camping area that they went to on the weekends and have family gatherings at. And they built a house and garage, and I would go out there when I turned a teenager. I went out there all the time, spring breaks and other summer break, trampling around on the property. Most of it is forested. There was at that time an active farm. There was 10 acres of fields, and butterflies were my first love. I had a very cheap butterfly net and chased butterflies around, and I moved on to birds and reptiles and creeking in the big creek. There's a big creek on the property, and a smaller creek with a spring, and I try to document all the animals and plants. Trees were, of course, the first things I looked at, but quickly went into wildflowers and started taking pictures of everything, identifying everything, creating lists. And thanks to that knowledge and experience of kind of like Nancy said, it's a great way to, nature is very healing, as Nicole said too. It's place to escape your problems at home and stuff like that. So I did that a lot, just hang out in the woods for hours and watch wildlife that normally, if you just walk in the woods and make a lot of noise, you wouldn't see. But got to see a family of beavers in the creek, family of woodchucks, um, had a flying squirrel that a birdhouse I put up in a tree in the woods, even though it's really not the thing to do. But I did. Flying squirrels liked it. Birds never used it, but flying squirrels used it. So I really want to do something. My goal was, and as a teenager, I was very much into advocacy. I was wrote a letter to President Reagan about not allowing drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is still something that we talk about today. I joined a Sierra Club and all kinds of environmental groups. And when I got a letter or an invitation to become a member of the Nature Conservancy, I thought that was the coolest thing ever, that a nonprofit could protect land. And you had to were just formed by ecologists, protecting land for nature when the governments would not act, as Nancy mentioned in forming her Highlands Nature Sanctuary Arc Appalachia group. And so I wanted to do something in the field. And certainly my grandparents were a great influence on me, but I took general botany course, and the professor I had was Dr. James Hickey. And he saw that I had really a strong interest in plants and stuff, and he convinced me. I was not didn't clear my major by that time. It was a freshman year. So he said, "What about botany? How about you go into botany?" I was like, "Sure, I like plants." And he got me a job. Got married while I was in college, which is kind of crazy, but worked in his lab and did a lot of things. And he was certainly a great influence. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. And in my junior year, Dr. Ori Laux, who was on the board of the Highland chapter of the Nature Conservancy, shared with me about the Natural Heritage Program, which is a program TNC formed to document rare species and natural features for driving conservation, which I thought was really another brilliant idea and something that I was right up my alley. And so I was very fortunate. Back then, the internet was just a fledgling thing and was not very useful. So my wife saw a job posting and at the one of the Miami branch campuses, and she said, "This is your job." And it was working as a field botanist in the Division of Natural Areas Preserves, where the Heritage Program was. And I didn't get the job, but I was the second best interview and they offered me a seasonal job, and that kind of put my foot in the door. And I went through the hard times because in this field of field botany, you have a lot of few jobs and a lot of people winning those jobs. And so it's always up to the funding, and of course that's still a problem, hasn't gone away. And so I worked part-time permanent. Eventually I got part-time permanent with the Nature Conservancy and Division of Natural Areas Preserves, and which was a lot of work. I basically worked 6 days a week for several years, but And eventually, the DNAP job was cut after 9/11, and the state was hit with a pretty severe budget cut. Got full time with the Nature Conservancy, doing work, similar work I was doing in natural preserves, documenting rare plants, doing invasive control, studying, inventorying properties, looking at properties for preservation. And during that time period, I helped protect my first property. Actually, it was a little bit before that. Francois Reitenbach was her name. She's a French woman who married her love during World War II, who was a German American, and they bought a farm that has a bog on it. And eventually, she donated the land, and we preserved it. So that was my first land protection, and I still doing that work now as a full-time botanist at the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves, and my time is up. So I'll stop there, but I just want to say I agree with what Nicole and Nancy say. That's it starts out when you're very young, and but it's never too late to appreciate nature and see the beauty and importance of nature in our lives. So that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm a late blooming naturalist. I grew up like city. And so I'm so grateful for you reminding us that it's really never too late to get engaged in these things. And we have a bunch of students from SCNR, the School of Environment and Natural Resources, here today. And I'm also just so grateful for your reflecting on some of the challenges that you've had in your career as well, and how you've still managed to continue doing something that was really important for you. So thank you for sharing that too. Again, if you have questions for Rick or Nancy or Nicole, please add those to the chat and we will get to those soon. But first, we're going to hear from our final panelist, Susan Leopold. Susan Leopold is a PhD ethnobotanist and a passionate defender of biodiversity, who is currently the executive director of United Plant Savers. Prior to working at United Plant Savers, Susan worked as a librarian at the Oak Spring Garden Library, specializing in digitizing rare herbals and botanical travel manuscripts. She currently serves on the board of directors for Botanical Dimensions and the Center for Sustainable Economy. She's an advisory board member of American Botanical Council. She's also a proud member of the Potawatomi Indian Tribe of Virginia and the author of the children's book, Isabella's Peppermint Flower, teaching about Virginia's botanical history. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Wow, just really honored to be here among all the panelists, sharing such incredible stories. I kind of, see myself more as an ethnobotanist than a naturalist. I think I certainly, share just that calling and, connection to the natural world and, just so many fond memories of exploring the pond and the woods in my backyard growing up as a kid. And then also seeing, the amount of, development that has happened in and around the area that I grew up, and, that's kind of transformed the landscape in just my short lifetime of witnessing what's been happening around me. I started off sort of as a geography major at Boston University, and I ended up transferring to Friends World College in Costa Rica and did my undergraduate in Costa Rica, which was just an incredible time to be there, and really thought I was going to just stick with environmental education. I had co-founded a company called Costa Rican Adventures, and we did tours for middle school and high school, and some college trips, I decided to come back and actually happenstance had found out about the Conway School of Landscape Design. And it's a really unique school in Western Massachusetts. It's a master's program and has a strong focus on working with native plants in the landscape, which was important to me at the time. And from there, I, went into landscaping and actually focused on doing educational gardens and decided to go back and do my PhD at Antioch University with a focus on the ethnobotany of a very small mountain range called the Bull Run Mountains. And I was really looking at this kind of, that kind of the concept of, I think I started off my inquiry with wanting to document the loss of ethnobotanical knowledge, and what were the social drivers of that change. And what I discovered in that process was that actually, as quickly as knowledge can be lost, it can be regained. And that was kind of an eye-opening kind of awareness. And as was mentioned, I also worked for the Oak Spring Garden Library, which isn't far from where I grew up in Virginia. And I also worked for the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, which is an organization that focuses on land conservation and creating conservation easements. And it was, kind of an interesting convergence of how I ended up with the job as executive director at United Plant Savers. And for those of you that don't know about the organization, it's a really unique organization. Actually, we're celebrating 30 years this year, and it was really founded by herbalists and people in the herb industry that were very concerned about not necessarily the over harvesting, and certainly the increased demand in native botanicals, but also, the loss of habitat for these native medicinal plants. And we have a botanical sanctuary. It's 360 acres in Meigs County outside of Rutland. So not far. I really encourage people to come and visit. We have around 5 miles worth of trails and a welcome center, small museum about native medicinal plants. And we're always doing, really interesting hands-on educational events out there, from, growing your own ramps to propagating elderberries. So it's a good thing to be aware of. I think that one thing that makes kind of United Plant Savers, I think, unique is that we really want to see reciprocity within how we connect with the natural world. And I think, I've been on the board of the Native Plant Society and, lots of conservation groups, and it's all like super incredible work. But it's really difficult to kind of, tackle how we use plants and how to create those reciprocal relationships. And that's kind of, I think, really what's at the core of United Plant Savers. A lot of people don't realize we really are, in the Southern Appalachian region especially, it's a biodiversity hotspot for medicinal plants. And a huge industry is reliant on a lot of these medicinal plants that are still harvested from wild populations. And so we're really trying to bring awareness to that and instill more sustainability in teaching people how to propagate these plants that have a huge economic value in the marketplace. So I just, want to, honor everybody, the previous panelists, sharing like really vulnerable experiences with nature that's like inspired each of us in a different way. And when I think back on, when you read historical literature and you look back at some of the naturalist journals, especially, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was, I think of, Humboldt, especially, there was such a love of nature that was communicated, and how we wrote and talked and studied about nature. And I feel like academic journals today and how we do science, it's really like, let's remove the person and sort of talk about this, scientific method in a way that like removes the heart and sacredness. And I hope that as future naturalists that we remember why we do this work, and that we're able to write and communicate in a way that inspires and fills not only our own uh passions, but also inspires others around us. And I feel like that's missing from the academic perspective. And I don't know how we kind of went off the rails, but needless to say, I thought this idea for this talk is right up my alley. And so I'm grateful for being included, and I hope people come and visit the sanctuary. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. You're definitely speaking right to my heart about some of the challenges with science and science communications has really like gotten divorced from the passion and love that we hopefully have for the world around us. So thank you for surfacing that. I want to invite everyone who's here with us to continue adding questions into the chat so that we can try to get to as many of them as possible. And I'd like to also invite our panelists to turn your cameras on so that we can see you all as we start to think together about some of what we've heard tonight. I see there's some questions coming in, but I'm gonna take advantage of my position and jump in with one of my own, because it's something that I wrestle with so much, and I'm really curious how all of you are thinking about this. Each of you, I think, brought out some vulnerable positions, some personal narratives, and a lot of joy and love for the world. And we also know that there's serious problems right now, problems that also bring us a lot of grief and fear in terms of climate change, species loss, habitat degradation. So these are really pressing issues that can feel overwhelming. And I'm wondering how each of you might what you might offer us in terms of what you're doing, either for yourself to address that, like how do you kind of wrestle with that grief in yourselves and address it? And also for me as an educator, I'm just really curious, like how are you working with the people that you're interacting with to balance that grief with the kind of joyful and persistent spirit that you all have demonstrated in actually doing stuff, right? So like we need to attend to the grief, and we also need to like transmute it into action. So my question is, how do you transmute that grief for yourself, and how do you work with other people to get them to kind of harness that into doing something that can maybe feel more satisfying? I'll use the word satisfying.
I can go. And when you say grief, what are you referencing?
Well, and there's a couple of questions specifically for you, Nicole, that I want to make sure we get to. And there's all kinds of grief. In this case, I'm really talking about environmental grief, climate grief, the overwhelmedness that we have about, knowing that we have so many species being lost every day that we don't even know the names of all of them yet before they're gone.
Yeah, I think it starts with ourselves in the practice of grieving, mourning. And if we really heavily think about the practice of it for our own selves, like what that feels like, what that means, and then seeing and experiencing it from different spaces, different levels of connection, I think has it allows us to slow down and really pay attention to the importance of thinking about death more versus it being a final, like there's a finality to it, but there's a cycle of life and death. And what does that mean when we experience it as human beings, but when we witness it happening continuously to nature and to the environment, and really giving breath to experiencing it, like really feeling it, really experiencing it in a way that we're not used to, but it's beneficial in the long run. And I think with loss, it can seem very heavy, but also you become numb to it because you are experiencing, or I guess witnessing it so often that you don't really have time to stop and process it properly or in a healthy way. And that it's ongoing. There's no into it necessarily, but I think it's in how we look at how we care for ourselves and how we want others to care for us, and really putting that into practice in the small gestures of becoming more aware and noticing the gaps and where they need to be filled, but not feeling like we as individuals need to like put on this cape and try to save everything and everybody. Because that's impossible. We can't do that. I feel like in that sense, it's wearing us down even more to where we're so focused on this quote unquote saving versus just the living, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where my head is with that.
Thank you, Nicole. That built nicely on something that Nancy said. I see your hand is up, Rick. I want to give you a chance to reflect a little bit.
Yeah, I guess kind of grief. I mean, in this field of working in conservation and nature education, all that, it's a lot of grieving and also joy. I think a very core of me is protecting land for future generations. It's a little selfish because it gives myself joy to see something protected. And I mean, I've studied a lot of Ohio natural history, and the amount of change that after European settlement has happened. It's hard to fathom what Ohio was like prior to us draining, clearing the forest for cultivated fields and all of that. And luckily, people who cared started protecting land so others can experience what was left of Ohio's natural history, and of course this across the whole nation and around the world, for folks, the generations to come, to be able to experience the things that we were fortunate to experience. And one of the things we have this number of young budding botanists. I like to use the word budding, botanical joke there, is that I mean, I've taken some of these young botanists to places that I had visited, and unfortunately, because of non-native invasive species or somebody illegally dumping fill or draining the wetland for agriculture and stuff, that wetland, I remember, is now gone, and we can't bring them back. So we could do our best. We do a lot of restoration these days, but nature does the best job. And so once those wetlands or forests are gone, it will never be the same. So there's a lot of grief. So anytime we protect land in our division or our Appalachia or anybody in the conservation field happens, it's a joy, because the critters are living there that we don't know everything's on there. I mean, I just document the plants, not the other plants and animals, some animals, but So we don't know everything, but there's certainly a lot of mushrooms and stuff that still we don't know about, and we're still documenting new species in our nation, which a lot of people think it's new species are happening in other continents around the world, that we know everything here, and that's something that's not true. We are constantly finding new species all the time, and so that's quickly what I think about.
I'd like to share, if you don't mind staying on this topic a little bit. First of all, I think it's going to be different for everybody. So, but that's the point of having, you know, 4 people here to get different perspectives. But, you know, Aldo Leopold wrote a long time ago, to gain an ecological education is to live in a world of wounds. And that is very, very true. I think there is a very vague sense of doom that lays on our younger people, causing a great deal of depression and anxiety. And it's not always clear where it comes from, which makes it worse. But when you start to learn, you get your ecological education, then you know where it's coming from. We call it the invasive ID curse, where suddenly you realize all that greenery is the invading marauders, you know, which is not true, not fair to the plant. You know, it didn't ask to come here. It came and got thrust out of its community, stuck into a new community. And so now it's acting like a bully. That's never happened before, but I think, or I'll just talk about me. I can't say it would work for anybody else, but I'm definitely a savior complex person. I haven't changed as I got older. Nicole, I'm sorry, still saving things. No, not living, saving. It gives me great satisfaction. Every single acre, I will never get tired of it. I'll be 80 years old, I'll still be doing it. You know, as long as people like Rick and all of the young people behind him can come out and tell me all the cool things that are there, I'll happily sit at the computer and write that grant. I will do anything to save land, which is why we have 11,000 acres of it. But here's what I found is I'm kind of, you know, there's poets and then there's doers, and I'm definitely more in the poet end. I took it hard as a young lady. You know, it's 15, 14, 16. I cried myself to sleep. I'm like, I don't like this world. I don't like what's happening. It's too painful. It's just horrible that I have to grow up in a world that's falling apart. And of course, back in the 70s, you know, all the predictions were falling on our shoulders. Like, oh, you know, this is going to happen in 40 years and 20 years and 50 years and whatever. But for me, for my personality, it worked to do something. I can't say, yeah, sure, the pain pushed me into action. There's no doubt. It did take, I was still 40 some when I finally got moving, so I wasn't a quick learner. But when I started to do something, when I started to change my life habits at home, when I started scrutinizing everything that I did and said, you know, I can do better. I can do this better. When I hung around friends that would teach me what they figured out was better. And every tiny little thing made me feel more like maybe I am being reciprocal to the earth. Because before that, I knew I wasn't. I wasn't proud of my position on the earth. But when I knew that I could give back, it's not like the pain didn't go away, but somehow I could live with it. Because I knew I was trying. It's back to that trying. I knew I was sincerely doing my very, very best. And so I forgave myself for breathing, forgave myself for eating at the dinner table. And, you know, I'm like, because I'm taking these 2 hands, I'm taking my soul and I am giving back to the very best of my ability. It helped. I rarely have a depressed day. Doesn't mean I'm not sad. Doesn't mean I'm not tearing my hair out. Sometimes I'm angry, but somehow they're all manageable. It worked for me. Do something.
No need to say sorry, Nancy. Your version of, I think we have different versions of what saving means, but for me, if it's not putting pressure on you to where you're losing yourself, trying to save other things and other
All
people.
the time.
Yeah. You're still you at the end of the day,
like,
so
honey,
you're good.
You need to get balance in your life.
I want to thank you for that. And I want to spend a little more time on this mental health, environmental health stuff, because we had a few questions. But before we do, I wonder, because I think this relates to this question of saving and what it means to save something or be saved by something. I wonder, Susan, if you could just talk a little bit more about this idea of reciprocity and what it means to kind of think about when we steward land, like how is land also stewarding us? And I think that might even lead into some of our questions about health.
Yeah, I mean, I, I think, I mean, it's a difficult topic to talk about because it can, it can mean something different for each person, and it can mean something different for, each environment that you're working with. And it's a very, personal kind of, endeavor. So it's hard to, put that into words, but I do think, I think it's just being quiet and listening is a big, aspect to that. And I mean, obviously, like, in the realm of herbalism, like sometimes I say like herbalism is like the gateway drug to activism, because, we're just really interested, like what can this herb do for us, right? And if you, are really soothed by a cup of chamomile tea, or if you're inhaling, the vibrancy of mint, it like shifts you, and that gets into, of course, like all the research and study that's been done with forest bathing. And we realize that, trees are giving off VOCs in the atmosphere, these volatile organic compounds that are like helping us heal and create, resilience to viruses and bacteria. And so I hope that research is like, shifting or understanding from a physiological perspective, like, how living within our environment, like heals and shifts our emotional state of being. But so yeah, so people really, people get really interested in, wildcrafting. They get really interested in making stuff. They get really interested when they're like engaged. And so then you shift that to like, how now what can I do to kind of give back? What's that, what is that level of reciprocity? And often, in a lot of cases, we have this botanical sanctuary network. So, and there's lots of programs like this, like, your wildlife backyard, or your homegrown national park, or, just this kind of like shift in awareness of how you see your environment. But we have this botanical sanctuary network, that people can join. And it's really, there's no like amount of land or things that you have to have, or, it's really just comes down to like setting that like intention, and that intention can be whatever that is for you personally. So that's why I kind of say that herbs are the gateway to activism, because I feel like, when you connect with nature and you find it has healed you, you want to figure out how you can heal nature, and it shifts how you see things in the world. And sometimes, like doing less is more, like why not just not mow your lawn, and why not just not rake up your leaves, so that so these, it's not necessarily that we have to do, we don't necessarily have to plant that tree, but maybe we just like leave the leaves, and
We're
we
not good at
our
leaving stuff
awareness.
alone.
Anyway, so that's
Sorry, I just
oh,
realized I wasn't muted, but okay, sorry.
yeah. um so anyways, those are some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Susan. And I do want to like stay with this kind of where you were taking us, and get to, there's a number of questions here about healing. So I will try to synthesize them, Nicole, but you kicked us off on a theme that I think is really resonating with people around mental health. There's comments. I think people are really appreciating this idea of listening. So, you know, I think there's the kind of direct, like, how would you recommend that someone who's feeling low motivation, low energy, feeling depressed, how do they start to get back into nature and appreciate the environment again, is one of the questions. So that's like on a personal level. And then we also have a question that's like a twin to that, which is, as a practitioner, as a counselor, as an educator, how do we think about incorporating nature time into this hierarchy of needs that's often presented to us. And unfortunately, sometimes nature time is not considered part of that hierarchy of needs. So maybe you could reflect a little bit about those ideas, Nicole.
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate, I'm not a therapist. I would consider myself an educator first and foremost, also a lifelong learner. So the learning always continues. And then in connection to therapy, but not as a therapist, helping coach people into practicing, bringing more of the nature practices into their lives. So like adding more, nature walks to your day, or planting flowers in a garden or as part of a community effort. But also things like citizen science. Like, I'm not a science person, but like, how do I get into learning more about specific things that as it relates to the environment that's it's not a heavy lift, but it's expanding my connection and learning. And really through all those things, you're building a relationship with nature. So for me, growing up, I was just always thinking back to my childhood and my younger self, of just my relationships with people in general I was just very wary of people because of the abuse that I experienced. And I wanted to feel more like myself versus in feeling fearful or feeling not even vulnerable, but just exposed, and really wanting to share my interests, and not even at that time knowing what those interests were, but if I had an opportunity to just share it with anybody and everybody. And when I got to a point where I just wasn't okay with talking to humans, nature was my backup, and I could share all my thoughts, whether I was sad, whether I was happy, whether I was confused and was seeking clarity. I felt like nature was that confidant that I was looking for in human beings. And it took me a while to get to the point of understanding that I still needed to like rebuild relationship with people. But I had to start with my own story of, it wasn't my fault that I had a disconnect from humans. Like it was from someone else's doing, creating that fear and that disconnect. And once I got to that, it really helped me deal better with my anxiety and my depression, because I could go outside and just feel, like, even if it was the most disparaging, like just the world is ending type of feeling, like, if nature wasn't expecting anything of me, I was just able to be present with myself and with nature. And like Susan was saying, just listening, like I just spent a lot of time listening to nature and just wondering, like, what are you trying to say to me? Like, I'm going through something really difficult. I don't understand it because I was so young. But at the same time, having this reassurance that, like if nature was a person, it would be putting its arm around me and saying everything's going to be okay. Take it one step at a time. So that was nature for me in so many different ways. And I still, in terms of the educator part, is helping people understand that you can do things in small bits. Like you don't have to do them in huge chunks. And for me, it's literally just, if it's a 5-minute walk, if it's a 10-minute walk, you can slowly build on those practices. Joining a friend to be outdoors, it doesn't have to be at a park. It could be in their backyard. It can be in a garden. You can even grow plants indoors. And that connects to the stewardship having something be purposeful and fulfilling because you're taking care of it. It's giving something to you and you're giving something to it. Those are the deeper connections that it's not hitting you full force, but you do it more often, you do it often enough, it will start to make sense and realize, oh, okay, this has been doing something for me this whole time, and really understanding that relationship and that bond that you're building is not only helping you, but other people are seeing that too, like what it's doing for you. And then they want some of it. So like, oh, how do I get to that place of, you know, being able to enjoy the song of birds or feel the sun on your cheek? Like those things may seem very minimal, but like just knowing like, okay, your whole thought process can shift just by feeling sun on your face or listening to water, or hearing the birds, or even just seeing other people smile and enjoy nature in the outdoors. It does something to your body that reconnects you to that centering of self and being present. So for me, it's definitely me acknowledging my own story of trauma, but also wanting to find a way to, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I always see it as like, I'm creating, as in terms of my coaching work, I'm helping others create a toolbox for themselves through the practice of meaningful nature connection activities. And this can be bird watching, this could be hiking, this can be kayaking, this could be rock climbing. It can even be just be sitting and meditating, you know, in the grass. But because you're able to start creating that toolbox with whatever makes sense for you to go back to when you're struggling with depression or anxiety or fear or feeling vulnerable, you can always pull that out and say, oh my goodness, this is what I needed to help me get through the next hour or the next day or, you know, the next week or for a lifetime. So my coaching really amplifies creating a toolbox of care. But also that toolbox is helping you better love yourself and better understand yourself, to be able to communicate to others. Because had I not had that relationship with nature, I still would have been very wary of humans in general.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I want to draw all of the panelists' attention to what's happening in the chat, because people are very inspired by what you're saying and sharing their own stories. So thank you all for everyone for being vulnerable and sharing their stories. And I love hearing these connections to people. I often struggle even with language. Like, I think it was Nancy was like, well, what is nature? You know, what is nature? What is culture? Are they really different? Like, I don't know. We could probably talk for another hour and a half about that. But I do want to just maybe toggle a little bit away from how nature cares for humans and move to that other side of the stewardship of how we're caring for nature. There's a couple of questions from the participants about, like, how has the Ohio landscape flora changed in the long and short term for Rick? And then also for Nancy, I think relatedly, like, as we're stewards of land, and this probably all of you could answer this, you know, oftentimes there's a lot of degraded landscapes that we're stewarding, a lot of invasive species, and how might we best put our energies to protect these kind of and rebuild quality natural environments for the public good, even though some of these landscapes are very degraded and have changed over time. So maybe we could just think a little bit about doing that land stewardship and kind of what that looks like here in Ohio as naturalists.
Well,
You're muted.
oh, go ahead, Nancy. Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, in the sense of, I mean, we traditionally, conservation tries to protect our natural history or what was in the past. I mean, certainly was that in the 70s we have a video that was made that's or film was made with a lot of famous people now in it, talking about land ethic, and kind of Aldo Leopold talked about, and that we are in charge of the land and we need to protect it and protect these last remnants of our natural history and what Ohio was like at the time of settlement. And yes, I touched on a little bit, and I do a whole talk on this, and I could talk about it for hours and hours. So but I won't do that. But we are stewards, and back in the 70s, in our old management plans for our nature preserves, it said just let nature go, which unfortunately we can't do that anymore because our landscape is so modified. The hydrology has changed, then climate change on top of that recent in the last decades, and then non-native invasive species, some introduced purposely because they thought they would be good for a hedge, multiple rows, which pokes risk my skin every time I go out in the field, and it seems like anymore. Controlling those invasive plants that we've learning more about how they impact our ecosystems and the plants and animals that rely on these habitats that we have protected by acquisition and conservation easements, that we can't just let it go, because if we just let it go, these invasive plants will take over. And we have many discussions about should we just put up the white flag and just let it go, but we can't. Because the plants and animals that I track the rare species that are already on the brink of extirpation in our state, and some species extinction. We need to be very active on the ground, and it takes a lot of people and a lot of energy. And our division is so thankful, I know Nancy too, of volunteers and OCVNs who have helped our division a lot over the years on doing eco management on our preserves, because we just don't have the staff to do it. We have a lot of other duties that we just can't spend all of our time doing that land stewardship work.
I want to hear from Nancy, but before I do, I just want to flag, somebody did ask about volunteer opportunities with all of you. So, and maybe there can be something that we post on the OCVN website later with like how people can connect with you later to volunteer. Does that sound like a possibility?
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Nancy, I do want to hear your thoughts about land stewardship and invasives, and the struggle is real.
Oh my goodness. For sure. Most of Ohio's lands are degraded, and the ARC has kind of taken the niche that we scan all over Ohio, and very similar to natural areas. We're just like the private counterpart to natural areas. Is we'll go just about anywhere, at least in Appalachia, mostly because that's where the prices are more affordable. You can get more biodiversity back for your investment. We'll go anywhere where we can find the best of the best that's remaining. If we can find an intact community remaining, whether it's a wetlands or a forested hillside or riparian zone, a fen or bog or what have you, or a mature forest, which has the most biodiversity of all, we'll go in there and try to buy that land. But even trying, most of our lands have at least some of their landscape, maybe as much as half of their landscape, pretty badly degraded, even though they're still the best of the best. We're not going to talk about the worst of the worst. That's a whole nother, measurement system. But so we do rely very heavily on our staff and our volunteers, and it is a lot more work than buying the land. Basically, buying the land is kind of easy, really, compared to stewarding it. It takes tens of thousands of hours to take care of even a few properties. But I think the good news is that it can be done. It's not going to be done perfectly. So, Nicole, mental health, mental health. We will never do this perfectly, accept our imperfections and then act as if we don't have any. But you have to accept them, because you can only do so much. But when we get together and we start working together in large groups, it is unbelievable. And the Arc of Appalachia is pushing 30 here pretty soon, and 30 years is a long time. And what I'm really excited to see is we're starting to get in the wavelengths now of communication, and people know we're here, and they know that we're wanting volunteers. And where it used to be, we'd be happy to have 6 people show up for a volunteer work day. It's not uncommon now to have 30 or 40 people. We usually, just speaking of trails, which is not stewardship, I get it, but we're putting in trails all the time, and we're putting one at a preserve called Resilience, which you might think about, why would we call it that? And it's our first trail in Hocking County. Last weekend, the weekend before, 40 people showed up to put the trail in, and the trail is 4/5 done in one day. And normally with our staff, it would take 2 years. So it was really, really exciting. You can say that same thing about stewardship. But I think there's a couple of things I want to say about stewardship is we need labor, there's no doubt, but we also need knowledge. And there's nothing like a knowledgeable steward to show up on your volunteer crew, and you're like, oh my God, thank God, because they can go out there with 6 other people and they can start teaching them. So what does teaching them mean? How to apply an herbicide? Well, I suppose no, but the big thing is plant ID, plant ID, plant ID. And this is, yes, this is where we're all kind of coming together in here. It's one thing to look at the postcard and go, oh, it's green, it's beautiful, it's, it's nature, I just feel good. And it's true, you do, but it is a postcard. It's not going to have the same depth. Imagine if you're watching a movie in Korean and everybody looked alike and you couldn't understand the language, and you're watching the entire film. How much are you going to get of that story? You're going to get nothing. Oh, you're like there's some bad guys, or maybe that's a good guy. Oh, I don't know, Well, if you're looking at nature, you've got to know who's on the basketball court. You've got to know what children of your friends are out there, tossing that ball around, and you have to see how they interact. And so I know it sounds boring, but if you go to Spain, you got to learn Spanish. If you're going to become nature literate, you've got to know the players. That's what we call a trained volunteer. And I think Appalachia really stands for nature literacy. Our education is about immersion and actually learning. And a lot of people are like, oh God, that's so boring, learning the names of all the wildflowers. I don't think it is. I know, Rick, it isn't, but some people think it is. But the thing is once you know it, or once you know your trees, then you can go out, and now you're in the community. You're not watching a postcard anymore. You're a member. You're a bona fide card-carrying member of that community, because you recognize the residents of your community, and they all have a different need, and they're either working together or they're fighting.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I know the students in Natural History of Ohio that's resonating with them, because they're learning the names of many things now. And one of my favorite
it's the doorway that you got to walk through to become an effective steward. Now, until then, what do? You still go out there and steward, and you go find that person in the group that knows their ID, and you follow them, because stewardship and ID is all about learning from another walking human living being. The book helps you after you know. Before you know, you have to follow somebody around. That's just how.
We only have a couple of minutes left, so I have to embrace a thing that I bring into all of my work, which is we have to accept and expect non-closure. So we're not going to get to everyone's question today. I absolutely feel you on the naming thing. Angela Davis says naming produces power. So I think when we name other people, when we name the world, we recognize the power around us. So thank you. I'm going to ask us to just I'm going to ask the panelists to answer one more question in 3 words or less. And then I'm going to ask everyone who's with us to answer one more question in the chat. So I'm going to ask you to think, panelists, what are you inspired to do next on your journey in 3 words or less? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask everyone here to answer a different question. We're going to do it in what I call a waterfall. So I'm going to ask this question, type it into the chat, but don't hit enter yet. And after we hear from all the panelists, we're all going to hit enter, and everyone's answer is going to come scrolling down at once. So we have 2 minutes. The question let's just ask everyone the same question. What are you inspired to do next on your naturalist journey? So if you're in the audience, type it into the chat, but don't hit enter yet. And from our folks here, 3 words or less. What are you inspired to do next on your naturalist journey, Nicole?
Take more naps.
Susan?
I want to get more involved in legislation.
Rick?
Inspire, hopefully more youth into being a naturalist.
Nancy?
Anchor global connections.
For me, it's always the same. Get outside more. So would everyone hit enter right now? What are you inspired to do next on your naturalist journey? And we can see all of these amazing things.
Oh
I
my
don't know,
God,
if
that is
anything
so
like
cool.
me, I will be saving this chat and combing it. And I encourage all of our panelists to do the same, because there's some beautiful stuff in here. I want to thank you all so much for making the time to be here with us today, all of our panelists, all of these 100-something people that have been participating. We do have a evaluation that hopefully people will fill out. If someone could drop that in the chat as well. Thank you. And there will be a recording of the webinar up on the website. And just get outside more. All right. Thank you, everyone, very, very much. We appreciate all of your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you all so much.
Been
That was
fun
great. I could have spent
and learned
5
a
hours
lot.
with you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Too.
great night.
See ya.